We're now going to transition into the panel, so involving Eugene Johnson from Zyrl, Matt Conwell from Tedco, and Jesus Salas from Omidyar Network. Quickly, I just dropped all of their @s for Twitter into the Zoom chat, so if you want to go follow them on Twitter along with Spiro Ventures, please feel free. Eugene, Mac, and Jesus, if you guys could kindly turn on your videos, I will begin by asking everyone a question each, and in that question, I'll also kindly ask you to introduce yourselves. So Eugene, we're going to start with you, and this is actually a question that we've gotten in the last 2 sessions, but we really think you can speak to this particularly well. So as someone selling that product into the restaurant industry during COVID, do you have any advice for founders? Should they approach on how they should approach doing a family and friends round, especially if they don't have rich friends or a particularly broad network?
Awesome. Just let me know if you can hear me. Perfect. Yeah, so I'll introduce myself, Eugene Johnson. I am the CEO of Zyrl. Zyrl is pretty much a solution for fast casual restaurants to match the in-store and digital ordering process to make it seamless, and to gather analytics for businesses to reconnect the user post-purchase. And we continue to grow a network of businesses and stores. And the bigger the network, the more consumers have the opportunity to kind of, engage with the restaurants in a new and fun way. As far as the question itself, this is actually an interesting question. I know a lot of people would like to know, all right, because I just so you give you a little bit of background on me, I came from one of the worst neighborhoods in New York. So, the minute they said, oh, you have to raise a friends and family around, I said this jokingly, oh, my friends are broke. How am I going to do that? And somebody told me something I think made me see it a little bit differently, which is, the reality is that a lot of people, sometimes we make decisions for people before we even give them a chance to make the decision on their own. And so I'm going to give you kind of like a practical way of handling this particular process, because I came from what I came from, but I raised $250,000 from friends and family. So you'll see that there's an opportunity to do it if you do it correctly. And here's what I did. So the first thing I did was make a list. And you know what I realized? I knew more people than I thought I did. And I knew more people who were in better situations than I thought I did. So I made a list of I would say maybe 300 people, 400 people, something like that. I just went to Facebook and literally just wrote everybody's name down on paper. I took it off of Facebook, put it on paper. Then you just got to ask everyone. And I know this is what most people don't want to do, is they don't want to just ask. Like, hey, would you be open to sitting down with me for 10, 15 minutes so I can tell you about this new business that I'm doing? I'm really excited about. You may or may not be interested, but I just want to show you what I'm doing. And then understand that you got to prepare them. When you go and you meet with them, you got to show them how they're going to make money, because most of these people have never invested in startups before. So they have no clue about convertible notes and any of that stuff. They don't know what that is. So you're going to have to help them understand this is not dividends. You're not going to get paid every month. The likelihood is you won't see money for 5 years. Like you just got to be honest with them about how the whole process works, and see if they can afford to lose it. If you have a friend and they can't afford to lose the $2,000 or $5,000, your best bet is just not to take it from them. If it's grandma and that's all her last savings is the $3,000, I would say pass on that and just ask for people who might have a little bit saved up. You'll be surprised. I got checks from people that I swore that they would not have any money, and they gave me a $20,000 check, because they had investments here and investments there. And then do the presentation. A lot of times when you're meeting with friends and family, sometimes it's like, I'm just going to chop it up with you and just kind of hang out and have a good time and then tell you a little bit about my business. But when you come prepared, they take you more seriously. They say, okay, this is a real opportunity with a real business that I can potentially have some success with. So just lay out a clear presentation like Stephanie talked about, get really clear behind it. As friends and family, treat them just like investors. I would say do these one-on-one instead of in groups. So in groups, you tend to get groupthink. And when you're doing the presentation, I would just say do it with emotion, because most of your friends and family are going to make their decision off of emotion and justify it later with logic. And then the last thing I say is like, just don't be afraid to follow up and say, hey, they're not going to make the decision right then and there. Just say, hey, I just want to follow up with you, give you a couple of days, or, set a time to follow up. And once you do get them to invest, try to follow up with them every 90 days and tell them what's going on. But super simply, a lot of it is really laid down to the ask. Most people are just not willing to ask, and they're afraid. And so they go to, hey, nobody I know has money. But the reality is, that's probably not 100% true. It might be 60% true, but that 40% could raise you a good amount of money if you are if you take it through a normal investment process as you would do any other investment.
Thank you, Eugene. That was a fantastic answer. $250,000 is a lot, to say the least, and the information about Facebook and the list and setting expectations with money was really amazing. So Mac, I'm going to transition over to you. You are quite literally, and I'm sure a lot of people in this audience can agree, probably the most active person on Twitter that we follow. And on your Twitter, so close to the start of your Twitter, you've actually pinned a story which talks to why you want to change the way that pre-seed funding is typically done. So Mac, using your experiences as a guiding light, I'm hoping you would just recommend, give some ideas for recommending how underrepresented founders might craft their pitches to talk to investors who have not experienced what the founders have. They can't necessarily readily identify with the founders' lived context. Hey, Mac.
Oh, nope, my mic was muted. Sorry,
Yeah.
the Zoom thing, If anybody's playing Zoom bingo, you just gotta square. So for minority founders who are building products in markets that, traditional investors aren't going to, not even going to sugarcoat that, white male investors aren't going to understand, you really want to try your best to put it in terms that they will understand, right? Like, I can't be in the room for you to help tell that person, like, hey, this is a really big market. You have to find a way to do that. And so, if you think about, you're in the hair care market, right? Let's say you want to do something that's catering to women who have weaves. A lot of white men don't know what a weave is, how that works, or what's going on, right? So what they do understand are two things. They understand wigs and they understand cancer, right? So being able to say, hey, what I do can help people who wear a lot of wigs, right? Like, I have a product that helps keep your scalp moisturized, and this can be an issue for women who wear a lot of wigs. And now we know that the market for wig care is ever growing, because in this country we have an issue with cancer. Most people have dealt with cancer or know somebody who's had cancer, or at least understand that, like, when you get cancer, one of the things you do is lose your hair. And they can kind of, think through, like, okay, people lose their hair, wear a lot of wigs. This could be a problem, just like people who wear hats a lot. And they can kind of make those connection points, but you want to try and be able to give it to them in a way they're going to understand, right? Just like if you're telling a kid something, there are going to be some concepts they're not going to get, so you try to tell them on their level. So you want to do the same thing. You want to make sure you have all the data you can to back it up, showing research on the size of the markets, right? Like, you want to be able to show that. And then you want to make the conversation at the end of the day, well, first off, as you give your pitch, right? The whole point of using connection points is humanizing the pitch. So I'm a big fan of using stories at the beginning of your pitch to help humanize your problem. Once you humanize the problem, that person who's listening to you pitch is now drawn in. They're drawn into, like, okay, I understand the problem. I know that problem. I know somebody with that problem. I have that problem, whatever it be. And so now they're looking for the solution. And once they get to the solution, like, oh, that's a smart way to solve that problem, then it comes down to the numbers, right? So then make sure you get to the point of the conversation where, I heard somebody ask about the go-to-market, right? You don't want it to just be broad and vague terms, right? Me as an investor, what I do is I invest in a black box. You put $1 in, $5 comes out. That's what I want to invest in, right? And so you want to get to the point where you tell me, this is the problem, I've humanized it, we know people have it. This is my solution, it's unique. Here's the market, it's a really big market. You might not believe it's a big market, but here's all the research, here's the data, it's a big market. Now we'll start talking about, okay, how do you get your customers, right? The more you can tie that to money or how money drives that, the easier it's going to be for an investor to conceptualize how their money impacts the company, right? And so like the easiest way to do this is, right, if you're talking about like Google ads, right? You like, so, you know, I tried $500, I tried $50 in Google ads and I got X amount of customers and it cost, and my CAC was Y. And then I jumped up from $50 to $100. I got X amount of users and my CAC stayed pretty stable. And then I went really crazy and used $500. And again, I had a 5X jump and my CAC stayed about stable, but my amount of users grew, right? So now I can make a calculation based on how much money you have, how much money you can spend towards ads to get customers. Now, I just used that as one example, but as long as you can tie it together to like, I put this money towards X and I get this many customers and the value of these customers are Y, I as an investor can make an equation in my head to be like, oh, if I give you money, more money will come out. And it doesn't have to be large figures, but you need to be able to show that it can happen. A lot of entrepreneurs like to use broad terms or like, I know I'm gonna get my customers. Like, no, break it down, make it about the dollars. Because at the end of the day, I need you to make more money. So you have, at the end of the day, you can return me money, right? And so I'll leave it there.
Okay, thank you so much, Mac. It's nice to put the, I guess, the man to the smart thoughts behind the keyboard. I really appreciate you talking about humanizing the pitch and using stories which people can identify with to draw them in, weaves and wigs. So just knowing that audience and being able to create examples that they're familiar with to make your pitch more palatable, I think that's really, really important. So Jesus, you are to the last one. I'm going to ask a question, and actually just before I do that, guys, feel free to drop questions into the Q&A into the Zoom, because we're going to transition into the audience Q&A very, very soon. So Jesus, one of my colleagues actually mentioned very recently that you hosted office hours to help founders with some of the issues that they face when it comes to crafting their pitches and getting ready for the fundraising process. So I'm just kind of wondering, what were some of the common mistakes that you saw? What were some of the tips that you gave? And how did that differ depending on which stage someone was in? So if they're pre-seed, seed, Series A, etc.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, perfect.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. Jesus Salas. I'm an associate at Omidyar Network, and I focus on early stage investments in the data security and privacy space. But outside of work, I help run an effort called the Access Project, which is what you were mentioning, Isham. It's free VC office hours for underrepresented founders. You can go on it, sign up. It's a simple form. We started this, a small group of VCs, started it last fall. Since then, have had about 50 conversations to date, which is what I'm going to be speaking on in terms of the biggest hurdles we've been seeing in our conversations. And I would put them in 3 buckets that I'll speak to. One is fundraising strategy, another one is the pitch deck, and then the last one is talent. I am better able to answer the first 2. The third one is a lot more nuanced, but I'll get into that. In terms of the fundraise strategy, a lot of folks often don't necessarily think they have a strategy, or flat out don't have a strategy. They're kind of just hoping that they're gonna have a couple of conversations and are gonna find an investor that's gonna see as much potential as they see in their business, and they're automatically gonna write that check. That's generally not how it happens, unfortunately. And one quote that I've heard before is, the best time to get money is when you're not asking for money. So if you just internalize that a little bit, what that says to me is you want to start early and prepare for a long process. I'll share an article from somebody who's a former 500 Startups founder, Arjun Arora. I'll share it in the chat shortly, but he says, estimate that you're going to have at least 100 conversations to have a successful fundraise. Now, that doesn't mean that if you have 100, you're going to get a successful fundraise, but you should at least use that 100 marker as an expectation that it's not an easy process. Now, once you think about a strategy, you want to think about who to target. So this depends on the stage. There are investors or VCs who focus solely at the stage level, pre-seed, seed, Series A. And then there is another bucket of investors that focus solely on the sector. So if it's e-commerce, if it's health tech, if it's B2B SaaS. And then there's another smaller bucket that's now up and coming, which is relevant to this group, which is focusing on diversity, Black and brown founders, diverse founders, what have you, which is good, but we need more of them. And we also need more VCs who are Black and brown, so that you don't have to do all the things that Mac just did around making things relate to the investor. If there were more Macs in the world, like you wouldn't need to do all that translation for that. So figuring out what those buckets of stage, of sector, of identity, figuring out where the Venn diagram, where are the overlaps, and trying to use, that's going to be the best use of your time, instead of just casting a huge wide net. You know, if you're raising a seed, you don't want to be talking to a Series B investor. Even if you have that conversation, it's not worth your time at that point. Two other minor comments around the fundraise strategy. Oftentimes I've seen folks leverage a newsletter or an email update quite well. So if you kind of think about it as bringing people into your tent, and this creates FOMO. So if you're sharing updates, like Mac was talking about, oh, I was able to do this with this amount, these are the wins that I've had in the past month. These are my major asks. If anyone can make introductions, you start getting people to want to see you succeed. And that's generally a good thing. Now, moving to the pitch deck, I jumped in on the Q&A from the last session. DocSend is one that I was going to share. You don't have to use it, but there's a lot of value in using it. It eliminates using PDF. It eliminates not knowing who's looking at it and then for how long. So a lot of cool analytics. But the way that I would think about a pitch deck is you want it to be enough to get a conversation with that investor. You want it to be the appetizer that's going to get them to want that entree and set up that call with you. Now, how do you do that? Once you have those conversations at your pitch deck, it's an iterative process. Once you have conversations, the 100 that I mentioned earlier, different investors are going to have different questions. You should identify which ones keep recurring and keep coming up, so that you can iterate your deck, so that the next time you send it out, that question or that uncertainty doesn't keep coming up. Because the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same results. So you don't want to have that to be you. Now, the benefit that an investor or VC has is that they look at hundreds of decks. They do many fundraisers. You are doing this maybe for the first time, maybe for the second time in your life. You have to put your head in there. You have to put the investor hat on a little bit and think about, what are they thinking in the back of their head? Now, leave aside all the bias and because that's real, but there's also the economics angle. And so you need to understand what metrics they're thinking about so that you can answer those questions in the deck, so that you instill a level of confidence in you and in your business, that if I invest in you, you're going to be successful. One quote that I really enjoyed listening to an entrepreneur in a previous webinar is, the current round is about the next round. So if you're raising a pre-seed, you need to understand what it takes to raise a seed, so that you are showing that you're going to be able to hit that marker. Because if you do, that means you're going to stay alive. And that means that my investment is a good investment, because I need you to stay alive. You can't leave any uncertainty. You need to de-risk your business, your idea, yourself as much as possible. And you do that by showing the metrics that are relevant. And be scrappy. I mean, Eugene with the fundraise, like the fact that he was willing and able to do all of that shows to an investor that, hey, what is this person not capable of? Like he's a hustler, he's scrappy, he's gonna make it no matter what. He's not gonna take no for an answer. And like, that's the kind of entrepreneur you want to be backing. The last third bucket, and I'll end after this one, is talent. And this is attracting, hiring, firing. It's difficult because it's so nuanced, and it depends on the company, it depends on the stage. The we have the conversations with the founders that apply. The best thing I can say is try to find other like-minded investors who you can lean on and ask the questions, because sometimes you being a solo founder or only having 2 founders, it can get quite lonely. So try to have a community, if not have advisors that you turn to ask these questions, to bounce ideas off of, because it is a lonely and often it's a hard journey. So you want to have folks that aren't necessarily your employees, because you don't want to always divulge too much to your employees, but you want to just make sure you have a sounding board. So I'll end there.
Thank you so much, Jesus. And actually, if everyone just looks really quickly, so Veronica actually dropped Jesus's link for Access Project into the Zoom, and I'm just going to do that again very, very quickly. So feel free to take a look at that website. So we're actually going to proceed into Q&A. So if anyone has any questions, please drop them into the chat, and then someone will message you for you to come on screen. We're going to start first with Arafat. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Do you want to just put on your video and unmute yourself? Arafat, are you there? Okay.
Go ahead and ask a question. He may have left, so we'll go ahead and ask his question.
Okay, no problem. So Arafat was asking, and this is just a general question posed to everyone, what kind of numbers should investors expect from a startup, aside from CAC, LTV, gross margin, TAM, SAM, SOM, all of that? And I'll just post it again for everyone to see.
I think you're on mute, Mac.
Yeah, it looks like Mac's trying to talk.
So there we go. I was going to say, it really depends on your business model, right? Like CAC and LTV are pretty good ones to always have. Your gross margins, that's really get into unit economics. Not every business model has gross margins, right? Like it all depends on your business model. So like if you're doing B2B SaaS, it's going to be your CAC and LTV. If you're doing a physical product, you know, gross margins is going to be a thing. If you're doing a marketplace, you know, understanding the difference between GMV and actual profit, right? Like what's your GMV? You know, what's your gross GMV? What's your actual profit? What's the percentage? And really, you know, you can get to gross margins there. TAM, SAM, SUM, that's just your market size. Like always have a market size. Like don't ever have a pitch deck without a market size. Don't ever have a pitch deck that says my market is everybody. It's just not going to work.
Okay, thank you, Mac. So the second question is from Amin. Amin, do you want to unmute yourself and put on your video?
Yes, hi everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep, perfect.
Awesome. So I'm more interested in which slides do investors want to see in pitch deck, and especially for the marketplace startups.
Jesus, I'll let you take that one.
Yeah, sure. So this also depends on the stage, and I'm maybe going to marry a little bit of Mac's point. So I just dropped the link into a really good post that actually lines up some of the slides, so that would directly answer your question. But the way that I would think about it is, depending on your stage, if you're pre-seed, and I see there's another question which we should have Loretta ask. If you're pre-seed or seed, it's a different ball game in that. If you think about what is somebody making an investment into at a pre-seed versus what is somebody making an investment into at a series A or seed. So generally speaking, at a pre-seed, pre-revenue, you're investing effectively in the team and the idea. And you have to understand that the market is big enough to support a VC backable business. Now, if you're able to dimension those in the pitch deck, you're solid. If you're moving into the seed and series A, you're going to have to show a lot more about the product and what you've been able to do and what traction. And that's whenever you start talking more about revenue. And you can get into the CAC and the LTV, which Max talked about, which is important. But that's really going to be important at the series B, which is oftentimes whenever folks aren't able to raise, because that's whenever the rubber hits the road around these unit economics. But before that, you really have to understand, again, the current round is about the next round. So what is going to get me to the seed? What's going to get me into the Series A? And that depends on, well, what do you have to show me? If you're pre-revenue, if you're pre-seed, all I know is that you're a hustler, you have a great idea, and you're going to go after a huge market. And I have to gain enough confidence that you're going to be successful in grabbing a big enough percentage of that market. And that's all I can do. But if it's a seed or Series A, it's a different ballgame.
Okay, thank you, Jesus. We're going to move on to the third question from Loretta, and it's about pitching. Loretta, do you want to unmute yourself?
Sure. Yeah, thank you. I think, can you guys hear me?
Perfect.
Yeah, I think maybe you just hit on my question, but I'm at the idea phase and I'm going to develop a machine learning app. And so I expect that it's going to take a while for us to research which exactly model we need to use, and evaluating those is going to be somewhat a lengthy process. So my plan right now is I have myself, who's working part-time because I have like my kids here full-time. I have a developer who's also committed to being on board part-time, and then 2 advisors. So my plan right now is to develop a web prototype to include in my pitch, just to kind of show like broad strokes what we're planning to do, but without having like a fully trained model. So I wonder what your advice is for pitching when I'm completely pre-product, pre-revenue, and even if I should I just be trying to bootstrap and, you know, seek out funds from my not so wealthy friends and family, like Eugene said?
I'll take that one. What I would say is this: it really depends on how deep your tech is. You know, I have friends who have raised money on deep tech that takes money to build. And so if it takes money to build and there's no way you can have a product without a significant amount of money, then that could be a scenario in which you can raise off of just the idea alone. And the way I would kind of structure it is the same way that Stephanie talked about, as far as like how to structure that pitch is just, you know, who you are, what your product is, who your team is, what problem are you solving, you know, how big is the marketplace, do you have any traction? Your traction may be, we've built this particular model so far, and then what's your potential revenue model if you do build it out, and then what's the ask and what's the exit. I think that these are kind of like, clear models and how to communicate that message. But I think your main question is really wrapped around, should you pitch? And I would say yes. Like, even if you can't raise money, just learning the process of how to have these conversations would be great as a practice. Plus, you know, you guys are part-time right now anyway. So, you know, pitching is not going to kill anything that you guys got going on currently. So I would go, throw it out there. And here's the good thing about pitching and throwing the conversation to a couple of investors. They'll tell you where you need to be in order to actually raise this round. So you'll communicate to them, here's my product, here's what I'm trying to do, here's what I'm trying to accomplish. And then they'll basically say, okay, come back to me when you have ... They basically just told you how you need to get money from an investor like them. You just follow that process.
Cool, thank you. So a couple other things I forgot to mention. I've gotten advice that I should validate the market. So I plan to do like some user research and do some interviews of my potential customers, as well as kind of gather up names and try to collect people that might be beta users. Do you feel like that's a good way to spend time before I actually have a product built?
So I'm probably going to say something different than Jesus will probably say, which is I'm going to conflict myself. Sometimes you can't listen to investors always, so you got to. This is kind of a gut feel. You've got to say, do I really believe that this market is big enough? I remember when I first got into the market and I was doing restaurant tech, and one of the early investors, right after we raised our family and friends round, and we're moving into our pre-seed, he was saying, you got to show me that the restaurant industry is big enough to handle your market. And I'm thinking, restaurant industry is $1 trillion industry. Like, That's a silly question. So sometimes you just got to really kind of understand, is your market, if I would have spent time doing that, that would have been a waste of time to prove that the restaurant industry is big enough to handle my product. So you got to look at what your industry is, and do you really believe that it needs to be proved out? And if you do, then you should do that. And if you don't, and if it's big enough, then that might just be bad advice.
Cool, thank you.
So quickly, again, for reference, I just reposted Eugene's response to Veronica earlier about talking to families and friends and what check size they should be targeting. We only have time for probably around 2 questions right now, so we're going to switch over to Jose Flores. Kindly just unmute yourself and go for it.
Hi, so can you hear me? Okay, awesome. And so I guess my question is also pretty similar to Loretta's. So I recently just left a startup that I was working on in a different city. I came back home. I kind of want to work on my own project after getting some experience with them. And I just kind of want to know how soon is too soon to start pitching, which, you know, you kind of went over. To get some background, I was working in like green tech startups, trying to replace gas generators. Now I'm basically moving into like food startups because I want to work with like coffee and products that people like to drink. And the idea is kind of using Robusta coffee instead of Arabica, which is considered lower quality, cheaper. But I believe if you blend it with tea and spices to make it taste good, you're lowering the cost to make it, and you're also helping the environment because it takes a lot less effort than making these high quality Arabica beans. And so like I'm kind of in the really early stages where I'm just making the product and making samples and trying them out, sending them to people, but I haven't reached the bottling stages where I can go and sell it even on a small scale. So yeah, I guess my question is just like, when is it too early?
I'll say, and I'll jump in, right? Typically, depending on the industry, right? Like if you're building like a therapeutic or some deep tech, you know, you may have to be early. But generally speaking, if you don't really have any customers, that's probably too early. And this is for me specifically, right? I'm a pre-seed investor. I invest super early. But even for that, when it comes to software products, I want to know that you know how to get customers. Yeah. Like you don't necessarily have to be making revenue, but you got to tell me how you get your customers. If you can't do that at a minimum, and it can't just be like, oh, I know I'm gonna be able to get my customers by doing X, Y, Z. No, I don't want to know what you think you're gonna do. I want you to show me how you executed on that, right? Right. And that's for me who invests really early. Other investors are going to be like, you got to like start showing me some revenue, right? And so what happens very often is entrepreneurs want to start raising money, you know, pre-product or pre-revenue, and they start running into all the no's. And really that's because you're probably too early to be raising capital. That's why the friends and family round's a thing. And, you know, for some entrepreneurs, not having access to friends and family round makes it difficult, right? Yeah. That's for a professional investor, somebody who does this day in, day out, that's not their problem to solve for you. But on the other end of the spectrum, what I'll tell you is angel investors are amazing because they're only investing it's individuals investing their own money, which means angel investors give you money for whatever reason. They give you money because it's Friday and they're feeling good, right? Like it just doesn't matter. It's their old money. And so the beauty of that is, and when I tell entrepreneurs, if you really feel like you have to raise money in order to do what you're doing at the earliest stages, then start talking to either people who have some kind of affinity to you, people who went to your university or something like that, or talk to people who are part of the industry that you're trying to work in. Because those are going to be people who are going to understand what you're doing, right? Like if you're building a product for the restaurant industry, go talk to a bunch of restaurant owners. A lot of restaurant owners have enough money to be considered accredited investors. And if what you're building actually solves a problem for them, they might be willing to put money behind it because they just want it themselves, right? You'll also hear stories sometimes, and it's rare, but this happens, of startups who are building a product that supports like a B2B company, who supports like a larger corporate office, where you can go to a corporate office who may be interested in using your product because what you're solving is so important, and use the money that they would pay you for that product to actually go build it because they just want it built. Like you have to get creative when you're that early. And so, you know, thinking through those types of things. Jesus might have more information on that though.
Yeah, I know we're running low on time. Just really briefly, it's never too early to have conversations. It might be too early to ask for money. So again, going back to my earlier comment, the best time to get money is whenever you're not asking for money. So I'd say right now, it sounds like you're a CPG, B2C, potentially like consumer packaged good company. So I would figure out what is the universe of investors who like are like the Maverons of the world, like try to get conversations with those folks, because if you end up taking angel funding or whatever, you're signing yourself up for the VC rat race in certain regards, and you're going to have those conversations down the road. But if you have them and you're just like, hey, I'm thinking about this idea, it's XYZ, like what do you think, who else should I be talking to? You want to pick their brains, but you want to do it in a way that you're planting breadcrumbs, and then you start bringing them into your tent again, and you start putting them to your newsletter or monthly email update, and you're showing your traction that, and you throw Mac on there, and he's like, oh wow, this guy has customers, and you're doing that slowly but surely. And as you're doing that, you're learning what the investors want to understand and what they need to know, so that in the future they write that check.
Awesome, thank
So
you.
it looks like we are more or less at the end. We do have one more question from Peter. Eugene, Jesus, and Mac, do you guys have an extra 2 minutes? If not, you can drop as needed. But okay. So Peter, would you like to unmute yourself to ask that question?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Perfect.
Okay, great. All right, thank you guys. Did an amazing job. Now we're seeing a flood of solopreneurs, just entrepreneurs that are just basically by themselves running a company, trying to get it done. And the question that I'm asking Bailey is that what do you suggest for as a workaround for these entrepreneurs? Because I mean, the key issue is always management, and that's what the VCs run on. But there's a chasm between those two. So how do you bridge those, that situation?
So
I think I'll jump in here because as a solo founder, quote unquote, I think I can give you a little bit. So I'm not necessarily a solo founder, but what I did was actually pretty interesting. I am a solo founder, but I got early team members who played a strong part, and I had them a part of what I called the founding team. And so it never really felt like I was a solo entrepreneur. Though I went into all my pitches by myself, I basically raised all the money with just me as the head. But when they asked about my founding team, I just talked about my founding team, and I didn't really necessarily say, okay, this person is a co-founder with me in the company. And I was kind of aware that I kind of circumvented that conversation. I just wanted, that's a quick tip. I know, Mac, you might have something, so I'll let you rock.
no, I was just going to jump in because I actually got to jump off. I have another call, but real quickly, what I would say, we always want to see a team because there's just no way for you to do all the stuff that you need to do in a day to run a business, right? But at the end of the day, what's the solve all for everything? Money. If you making revenue, don't none of that matter. Like I will invest in whoever if you growing fast enough, right? So that is so like if you are a solopreneur, it is just an additional hurdle you have. But if you got a company that's moving and growing and doing what it needs to do, investors will take a flyer on you. But what you do need to have is have a strategy on how you build out your team. Like come to the table knowing these are the people that you like, these are the jobs that you need to fill on your team. And like, this is the way you're going to go about finding those people. So at least I know you're already thinking about it. And at least you're giving me a reason. Like, I don't have a team today for these reasons, but these are the people I want to add to my team. And if you have 1 or 2 candidates for each one of those positions, it just strengthens your pitch, right? But if you're making money, we can figure out a way to get around it, right? But it was great meeting everybody. I got to roll. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. With that, we're going to more or less end the session. Eugene, Jesus, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And audience members, thank you for your great questions and your time as well. Just going to drop Spiro's website and a few ads. I added my app for extra measure. And again, thank you for your time. Going to end today's session. See you, everyone.